Hi, Janice.
How are you?
I'm great. And you?
I'm great. I'm ready for this article.
This is a long one, so we're going to kind of jump right into it. It's 13 reasons first-time homebuyers may regret their big purchase. So this one comes from Forbes.com, and I like that this is a little contrarian because a lot of the content out there is kind of sell side. It's kind of pushing everyone to do a deal or buy a house. And this is really sort of putting the brakes on that and giving you the contra, which I appreciate.
Yeah, different perspective.
Okay, why don't you give us can you review the intro for us and then jump into the first item?
The very first thing that jumped out at me in this article is 70% of millennial homebuyers regret their purchase.
Millennials.
Yeah, we always pick on millennials. And, I always say I do not identify with millennial because I'm in 1980. But we'll see how I feel at the end of the article. But that's astounding. 70% of millennial homebuyers regret their purchase.
That's a lot.
So the survey cited overspending on the down payment, underestimating ongoing costs, settling for a home that wasn't quite right. So there are lots of regrets. So here's why some homebuyers wind up in such regretful situations. They focused on investing and not living. So they looked at their home as an investment and not really truly where they want to live and be happy.
Yeah, I've seen this personally. Friends, I don't know if you know Manhattan that well, but friends who were speculating with their home and bought in, let's call them up and coming neighborhoods.
Right.
And I don't know if the financial aspect worked out. I hope they did. But while they were living there, it was not enjoyable because it was very up and coming, or gritty. I don't know what you want to call it. I don't know what the polite way of saying it is. Yeah.
Absolutely. So they'd rather have, number two, they'd rather have experiences over mortgages. So millennials, they just have different priorities than parents and grandparents. Home ownership was once that symbol of, oh, I made it. Now it's a little different. They want to see the world and have a little bit of fun.
Yeah, I mean, that seems to be just almost common knowledge at this point that the millennial generation prefers, well, maybe not specifically over mortgages, but just experiences in general, yeah?
Right, absolutely. So maybe that's a good time to rent because you don't know where you want to put your roots. Make the decision after you've seen the world and decided, okay, now it's time. Cool. Number three is they didn't know how the process worked. Well, they didn't buy your book. So I think that's the first step is, that your how-to guide for first-time home buyers. Could you give us the title?
Oh, yeah. It's How to Buy Your Perfect First Home, available on Amazon. And yeah, you need to know the process. And this is not just millennials, but first-time home buyers in general might not realize what a grind the whole process is. I mean, I don't want to deter anyone. It is useful to buy your first home, but it's not like the walking around and choosing neighborhoods and white picket fences. That's the fun part in the beginning.
It's not sunshine and lollipops. There's a process to this.
Yeah.
They didn't know how it worked. Or number four, they bought out of, I had to look this up, FOMO, FOMO, fear of missing out. So so then it says reacting to when they spend their money on a mortgage payment. So adjusting to a new budget, it just doesn't feel like fun. But they didn't want to miss out, so they bought the property.
That seems
temporary buyer's remorse.
Yeah, there seems to be a lot of that. I think it's, this is like social commentary. It feels like it might be a byproduct of the social media culture where you're constantly inundated with what's the latest trend, what's the latest hot concept. And if you're getting pressure to buy now, if you're being told or bombarded with messaging that at this age you should be buying a house, you might feel like, okay, I need to buy now. Or perhaps you're getting hit with messaging that interest rates are going up, you need to buy now. So you might kind of get
panic factor.
Yeah, you might be nudged into that decision that might not be quite ready for yet,
Right. And we've talked about the movies. You see it in the movies. Everyone looks so happy when they buy their house and the white picket fence. And that might not be the reality of it at that particular moment. Going right into number five is they didn't run the numbers before they bought. Very important is to know how much, not just the mortgage, but there's so much that goes into it. Home ownership and maintenance, by the time you put it all together, it's expensive.
A friend of mine, somebody I know, lives in an apartment in Manhattan, and you would think, oh, an apartment, not as much maintenance as a house. Yeah, so I know this is probably a once every couple of decades kind of thing, but they have to replace all the windows, meaning the metal frames and the glass, and apparently that's very expensive in Manhattan. Do you want to guess, Janice, how much do you think it'll cost?
Oh, I can't imagine.
$25,000.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
I'm pretty sure they weren't expecting that expense. So yeah, ouch.
That's, I would say, more than putting on a new roof.
Is that true? Oh, wow.
Yeah, I think a roof, because unfortunately we'll be in that boat sometime soon, but really, yeah, 20,000, 25,000.
Amazing.
Wow. That's just astounding. But that's something you have to think about, that is part of home ownership. Yeah. Number 6, they were looking for instant results. So they buy the house, and then every day they're checking Zillow or Zestimate or what have you to see how much equity they have in it. The markets fluctuate, so you can't look at it as an immediate investment. It's an investment that over, you have your house for 10, 15, 20 years, you'll have some equity, but very rarely, I don't know, maybe you have a different opinion, very rarely do you walk into a house with immediate equity.
3 points on this. Number 1, I talk about this in my book. You should be buying for at minimum 5-year holding, if not 10 years or more. So it doesn't matter what the price is the year after you buy, because you wouldn't be selling at that point. Wait and see what the trend is after 5 years, even if that, right? Right. Second point is real estate in most parts of the country. It's hard to get, even Zestimates and Zillow and Compass and all these places. It's hard to get a fair assessment of what a house is actually worth. I mean, Janice, is that accurate? Would you say in your neighborhood that the Zillow estimates are accurate, or they give you...
No.
Yeah, okay.
Okay, there may be somewhere in the ballpark, but the problem is if you look at, let's say, 3 different websites, you get 3 different numbers. Yep. So, of course, I like the one that's really high, not the one that's really low.
That's my favorite website.
I go with that one, but you can't, it doesn't work that way.
Of course, the buyer's looking at the one that's very low.
Right. He's looking at the other one, and I'm looking at the high one. So that doesn't really work out, somewhere in the middle maybe, but... it's a long-term investment. Yeah.
So those aren't even, basically the point is that those statistics, don't even look at them because they're not even accurate. Yeah.
No, definitely not. I mean, it's fun to look at, but it's just not realistic. But how about number 7? They underestimated the work involved. So picking a little bit more on millennials here, they're fast-paced, always plugged-in lifestyle. They want more of a turnkey. But if you think, okay, so you do watch Home and Garden TV. Do you watch Home and Garden TV? I love that, with the fixer-uppers, and they make it look so easy. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Okay, it's not easy. Have you ever tried to put in tile or, something on your own? But there's work involved. And if you don't account for that, or if you don't buy something that's turnkey, you might not be able to have, if you work all the time, when are you going to put in the bathroom? You have to think about that.
So from a city kid's perspective, I was raised and I currently live in Manhattan. I didn't really have that experience. I've lived in apartments pretty much my whole life. But my one exposure to that is my in-laws. My in-laws have a very nice house in Pennsylvania. And for the first few years, I was always kind of almost like eager and excited from the novelty of fixing up little things here and there around the house. But I got to tell you, after a while, that got real old. Real fast.
It's old. It does.
But luckily, my wife's sister got married. And now he has taken on all those duties. Oh, the new in-law.
That's so great.
The new son-in-law. Yeah, he's inherited my role.
Here's the list of things that have to happen at Mom's house this weekend. But it's true. I mean, there's always something to tinker with. We tinker all the time, especially in the summertime. You have to plan for that. Number 8, they didn't do their homework. Well, we've talked about this at length, very time. But let's say they choosing the property online, but not really like figuring out how much, your monthly payments is going to be and your budget. I mean, you have to, you talk about in your book, there is a process to buying a house. Got to know the process. You got to do your homework.
Yeah. I mean, buying your home is like 3 or 4 of the bigger financial transactions you'll ever make in your life. Number 1 is, of course, the purchase price of the home itself. That's probably your biggest purchase ever. Number 2 is the mortgage you'll be taking out, which can be complicated, which can have adjustable rates and mortgage rates. And that's probably the biggest loan you'll ever take out. Maybe after your student loans, kind of depends. And then, the closing process, that's probably one of the bigger attorney or broker's fees you'll ever pay. Hopefully, I hope nobody gets stuck in court too much.
Right.
And then lastly, the ongoing upkeep, even after, even discounting mortgage, taxes and maintenance mortgage and taxes, just general upkeep of your house is probably going to be one of your major outgoing expenses.
Yeah. It's like you said, this tinkering that we just talked about, That's not cheap. Every time you run to Home Depot, you throw down a couple $100 to fix whatever it is that needs to be done. That adds up.
Pro tip, go to the dollar store, not Home Depot.
Oh, see, just buy duct tape. Fixes everything, right? Maybe that's why things are falling apart.
Probably.
But, so number 9, they felt tied down to one location after buying. I mean, that's pretty clear. Once you're in, you're in. You said you shouldn't even consider moving for 5 years, but even then, if millennials like to move, that's the reality. That's the culture. And if you're in a house and you're stuck, where are you going to go?
Don't buy. It's hard to predict how you'll feel, but just try to do some introspection. The reason you don't want to keep buying and selling houses or keep moving is transactional costs. Each time you buy and sell, you're probably going to end up paying about 3 to 5% of the value of the house. So if you do that twice, buying and selling, that means even if your house went up 10%, you might be net zero, right? After our transactional costs. So that's why you don't do it.
It's expensive to buy and sell. That's the reality of it. So number 10, the home didn't fit their lifestyle. Whether it's too big or too small, they may have thought that it worked then, but it didn't. You figure too small if they start having a family, or just too much home, whether that's financially speaking, or, if they're not home all the time. I don't know about you, but housework seems like that takes about 20 hours in a 24-hour period. And if you're not home a lot, I mean, that's a lot of work.
This one I have more sympathy because it's so hard to predict. So let's say you're in your mid to late 20s and you buy the house that you think is perfect for raising a family, and then the kids come out. You start popping out the kids, and then you realize you have a totally different way or desire of how you want to raise your kids. I mean, how could you have known that before you became parents, So
well, you wouldn't.
Yeah.
No. So, but I guess, right. So do you wait? Do you not wait? It's
sometimes
tough to tell
sometimes life is just tough,
It is.
Yeah.
It is. It's so hard. So number 11 is they didn't have sufficient education from an agent. We talked about this just a minute ago. You see it on TV. These fixer-uppers, and they could do it themselves, and everything's DIY. Not when it comes to buying a house. Do not DIY. Call a professional. This is an important one. They're going to help you out.
Yeah, there's so many elements that can have long-lasting repercussions. Just make sure you're getting the best possible advice.
Yeah, absolutely. I always say, I think maybe 5 times in a podcast, you definitely need a professional. You definitely need a professional. This is definitely one of those times. So number 12 is they made one or more common home buying mistakes. They talk a little bit here about the putting down a certain amount, or the house, market fluctuations. There's a lot of home buying mistakes per se. Like you say, you talk about them in your book. I mean, you can't foresee it or make a plan for all of them, but you have to have really good knowledge before you go into it. The
one that jumps out to me is to don't go house poor.
Right.
Don't overbuy. I mean, there's nothing. I've known many people who are just totally burdened by their housing expenses, and it's just not a fun spot to be in because, like we said, selling has its own repercussions from the transactional costs. So you're kind of stuck a little bit, and that's never a good feeling for any situation.
No, you don't want to be house poor.
Yeah.
Which leads us right into the final one. It just doesn't feel like home. So you buy the house. You went through all these other 12 things. You bought it. You're locked in, but you go in and it just doesn't feel like your home. Maybe it's the community or the neighborhood, and it just doesn't work. And that could be just from a lack of searching beforehand, and that's important. You want to go home. You want to feel good when you go home. The feel goods.
I mean, the only suggestion I have to this point is maybe rent in the neighborhood you think you're interested in before committing to buying. But even then, with Manhattan, you could be renting in a different building, and building by building has different sort of cultures and vibes. So, just do your best.
Now, we were lucky enough. One of the houses that we purchased, we lived in the house. We rented it. We were renting the house. We were living there. Decided we liked the house, and we bought the house. It was the best transaction that we've ever done because we went to closing and we went home.
If you can,
no moving.
That is like the sweetest deal you can possibly get.
It was great. Yeah. Actually, we did the flip side is we threw everything out on the curb. We're like, we're not moving. We don't need all this junk. Get it out. And there was no moving. It was fantastic.
If you're able to find a situation like that, either as a buyer or seller, it works out it can work out so nicely for everyone involved. So that's a great.
Oh, it did.
Good for you.
It did. We knew we loved it. We loved it. We weren't sure because we moved a little bit out of our comfort zone originally, and then we loved it. We bought it. It was great.
Cool.
All right. There's hope.
Very good. So that's it. That's all 13 reasons first-time homebuyers may regret their big purchase. Janice, do you feel like or unlike a millennial after reading this one?
Okay, so with this one here, I feel a little less like a millennial because I've always been, of the mentality of getting a home and family. And so this is the first article where I'm leaning away from millennial.
All right.
So we'll see with the next one because I'm back and forth.
Okay. Thanks again to the Forbes expert panel. Thank you, Janice. And we'll talk to you next time.
We'll talk soon.
Take care.